Oh, we're running? Oh.
Start from awkwardness. That's always the best
We
start.
need a red light or something.
Yeah, we need a big bulb.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, hello, and welcome to Word Up Podcast. I'm Evie,
And I'm Webster.
and today we are here with Ard Kok.
Yes. Hello.
How are you today?
I'm pretty good. I've been very busy lately because my girlfriend from America has been here.
Ooh,
So we have like 6 weeks together. So
Nice.
trying to fit as many nice things as we can in this period, you know.
oh, so exciting. Thank you so much for giving your precious time to us then.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really.
But first, for people who don't know you very well or at all, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. I'm an experimental electronic music producer mainly right now. I think I've changed a lot in that since last year. I was in Iceland for a few months, and after that, a lot of my sort of musical direction changed, and that's why now I would say experimental electronic music producer. Before, it would have been more of like singer-songwriter and Dutch poetry or Dutch stories on music, which I did under a different name, and now I'm here, I think, as Either It, which would be my performance name now. I recently graduated with my performance from the School of the Arts in Utrecht, so I'm very happy about that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Which is also what gives me the time now to actually have Ella over, my girlfriend. So yeah, I think that's it.
Nice.
That's nice. I watched one of your videos at Outspoken.
Yeah.
It was you and your band, and you guys were sort of like doing a performance, and it was sort of paired with visuals, and you had different
Yes.
instruments. It's super cool. Can you describe your process? How did you guys come to be putting so much
Yeah.
into your art?
Yeah, that's been an interesting process, I think. I think I have to speak about Iceland also at some point, because it was just such a pivotal moment. And in Iceland, a lot of the things that I perform with now, and the concepts that I use, and the way that I collaborate with people started there, really. For example, the visual guy, Wouter Smit, is someone that I met during it was sort of Ableton masterclass during Amsterdam dance event. And I went there, and there were a few like artists expositioning their work there, and one of them was Wouter Smit, and he was having this installation of sort of audio-visual feedback looping. So it would be, I'm not entirely sure if I'm explaining this correctly, but he would have something projected on the wall, which he would film, which he would feed back into like an analog TV, and then he would record the sound and input that sound in the video input of the analog TV.
Wow.
Which makes the TV react with like just sort of flashes of light, and you know, the snow and the interference that you get on analog TVs.
Yeah.
And then he would record that back and send that back into the visuals that he was projecting on the wall. And sort of by making these infinite feedback loops of things, they all sort of started working together or interfering with each other to make this really weird visuals and really nice ambient soundscapes. So I just approached him after that, asked like, do you want to be a part of my graduation at first? But now it's, I think, evolved into just this idea that everything that I do will fit really well with his visuals. And I think the other way around too. And then I really work as like a collage artist, it feels like. So it's all material from Iceland or from after Iceland. So I use, I think, 4 of the 8 texts that we used in the graduation performance were texts written by people that I met in Iceland, that I just asked, like, can I just use those texts or have those texts? Which I was really happy to get. and then I sort of supplement them with my own texts. And it was kind of the same with the musical ideas. Like the guitarist will have some sort of musical idea, and we'd work that into the whole performance. And I think the thing that gives everything of that graduation performance, it's called hyper self, that gives it this feeling that it's really a whole, or that it has like a red thread. You can say that, right, in English, a red thread? Yeah. It's just really the concept, that everything for me is really concept heavy. And the concept that I'm working with now is the idea of, it's a lot about social anxiety and about interpersonal connection, and either feeling that or not feeling that. And then in the performance in Hyper Self, what we did was we started from this completely isolated individual that was not in touch with anything of its surroundings, or not even acknowledging any of the surroundings. It was just this completely internal world where everything happened because of own thoughts. It's just thoughts reacting to own thoughts, I guess. And then that sort of world of awareness slowly grows out until it acknowledges that there is something that exists outside of itself, until it eventually touches another person. And from that moment on, there starts to be interpersonal connection, and there starts to be, I don't know, like real emotions that grasp onto someone. But there also starts to become more awkwardness and more miscommunication. And then slowly that attention grows more and grows into the other person, because slowly from this feeling of there is another person that I can interact with, it starts to become, I need this other person because I need to interact with them, because otherwise I'm no one. And then in the end, that individual loses all touch with the self, and then completely disappears into the other. And it's just about, what can the other do for me? How can they change me? How can I validate myself through them, I guess. And the outspoken performance that you saw, which is not hyper self, but that's all improvised performance, which is how we perform now as Either It, because that hyper self performance is just way too big to do in any other place than kind of where we did it.
Right.
So that's all improvised performance based around the materials that we made there and the text that we used there. And then it's just every time we just see what happens. And that's what Outspoken was too.
That's amazing. It seems like the visuals that you add on top of the music and everything is all designed to sort of immerse the audience.
Yes.
Whereas usually when you go to like a live performance, you know, the artist comes into our space. We're sitting here with our wine and beers,
right. Yeah.
and you come into our space and you perform for us, and we might like it or we might not. But it seems like, you know, with you guys improvising and the visuals, we're kind of drawn into your world, you know, and that's something really cool about that.
Well, I'm glad, really glad to hear that, because I think that whole, just the word immersive, I think is really important for what we're trying to do. Because if the concept is something as much about like the individual or, you know, your own experience and this pretty fragile place of being socially awkward or uncomfortable, it's kind of hard to make a space in which people feel open enough to feel that, you know? So we try to create this space in which it becomes the experience of the people themselves, instead of something that I'm trying to tell, try to feel this. We're trying not to do that, because people will decide for themselves what they feel, you know?
Yeah. But now I'm really intrigued about Iceland.
Yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
I was going to ask the
Tell
same.
us when did you go? When did you come back? And what happened in between?
I'm also intrigued about Iceland.
It's a beautiful country, isn't it?
It's really nice, yeah. It's, and it's crazy how much the people there have this sort of innate sense of respect, I guess, for their surroundings, and it makes a lot of sense to me that someone such a creative mind as like Björk originates there, just because, I don't know, they seem to be really curious creatures there. I partook in Lunga, which is a sort of artist residency there, and most artist residencies, or like I guess the classic idea of an artist residency is that the artist that comes gets space and time and materials to just work on their art, and they either have to present an idea when they apply for it, or they just come and they get freedom. And Lunga definitely is that, but they also try to be they try to be a little bit of a school of sorts. So there are workshops that you follow, and they do call the people that join there the Lunga students.
Yeah.
But nothing is ever like mandatory, and everything serves the purpose of getting the artist to be, I guess, as in the moment as possible, and to really, I don't know, there's just something about Lunga that makes the whole thing feel like an art project, like a sort of a performative art project that lasts 3 months, that you just partake in, and everything you do is just part of it. Like every night that you go to bed, like what time you go to bed or with what motivation you wake up, it's just all part of what you apparently needed to be doing there, because you don't have anything that you have to do while you're there. So like they don't make you go to classes, or they don't make you make art. So if you feel like doing nothing for like a whole week and just sitting in a bench, then apparently that's exactly what you needed to do, because otherwise you wouldn't have been doing it. And that created this way of living, or something that was really about sort of finding yourself in the moment and spending time with your art, like spending time with whatever discipline you brought along with you, or whatever new discipline you wanted to be doing. So we also did like silence days in which we'd all be silent. We all lived together in this big hostel house that was just our home. Like there was no one else living in there too. So we had to take care of our home. Lunch and dinner was served in a restaurant every day, so we'd never have to think about food.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like one thing that I really loved that was for me very explanatory of how things were, is that we had to wake up, I think it was at 1 a.m. at some point.
Okay.
And then we all took a 20-minute walk just alongside this mountain hill, in silence. And then when we got to our destination, there was just this huge gong there. And then we all took turns just hitting the gong once, and then we walked back in silence, and then we went back to bed. And experiences like that, like it's super unclear why exactly we'd have to do that, but the next morning, the fact that you did that made a lot of sense, or felt for some reason like, yeah, we really did something. We really experienced something there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Were you there during the winter, or the dark season, or the light season?
It was crossing over into the dark season. So it was
Okay.
September until December
Okay.
of 2017.
Right.
So when we left, there was about like 4 hours of light per day.
Yeah, it's pretty intense
was-
also, right?
Yeah, there was. It also got pretty depressing sometimes, but then that was also part of it, I guess.
But the nature is also... Have you been in Reykjavik, or...?
No, Lunga is in Seyðisfjörður, which is actually the place where the ferry that comes in from Denmark arrives.
Okay.
So it's this really small town. It has, I think, 500 or 700 people living there.
Okay.
So it's like really small, and it's right on the edge of one of the fjords that comes like into Iceland. So you're really at the water.
Oh, nice. Must
And,
be really beautiful.
It was really beautiful. Like there was, if we'd walked out from our hostel and then 5 minutes up the hill, you could just see the entire village. It was just there, really small. We just start walking up the hill, and then within 15 minutes, the village would be out of sight.
Oh.
Things like that.
Now I'm having this wanderlust.
Yes, go there, I really do.
I've only been to Reykjavik and the southest point of Iceland.
Okay, right.
So that's the really black sand beach, and it's really alien experience.
Yeah, so I haven't seen any of that, so sadly.
And all the smelly geysers and things.
They're all there?
Well, around Reykjavik, it's not that far.
Yeah. Maybe I'm glad I missed the smelly guys.
It's an obligatory touristical moment.
Next time I go there, I'll do that. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so that was really shift for you creatively and personally, I assume.
Yeah, personally and creatively. I mean, it's all kind of intertwined, of course.
Yeah.
But it was a big shift because, like I said, like before I was way more doing singer-songwriter and more Dutch things. And I guess I felt a lot more pushed into this box of what a Dutch conservatory student should do. And although my study that I did, Musician 3.0, is a really free-thinking study, like I think as free-thinking as music education gets in Holland. But still, there's always certain things that I felt like I had to be, and those were just completely gone when I came back. So I mean, that's also why I only graduated, like, I guess 3 weeks ago, is because after coming back in December of 2017, I was just completely, I guess, out of balance. So I didn't go to school, and I didn't do anything for months, like 3 to 5 months or something. I just needed to zone out from the world and slowly get my footing. And that really took about a year. Yeah. And feel like I found it now again since a few months.
Yeah.
So is that something that you think you'll chase in the future? You know, pulling yourself out of context, being in a new place, finding different inspirations, since it's brought so much positivity for your music.
Well, it's the weird thing is, like, yes, I would love to, and I think through like the improvisational quality of what Either It does, we do that, and we sort of like also for what I'll be doing later in this podcast, like I don't really know. I have some text and I just brought the guitar, but I don't even know if I'm going to use it. So I think I'm doing that a little bit, but also like it did take me a long time of like really not feeling good in my skin for that change to have happened sort of eventually,
right?
Like it did now. So actually now I'm feeling more like using how I'm feeling now, a bit more, and sort of settling in, and maybe the changes after this can be a bit smaller.
Yeah, they don't always have to be leaps and bounds, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that was enough for a few years. Yeah.
Sounds cool.
So I feel like with what you're saying with your performances, you explore a lot about interpersonal and relationship, and also relationship with yourself. So inside out and outside in.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. And is this something that really interests you, and is this something that you want to explore further, or you feel like with what you've done for your final work is something that you're done with this and you explored?
That's a good question. I mean, you never really know where inspiration might strike. And I'm noticing that one thing that I do really want to pursue, although I'm not sure if that's going to be now, but are the more sort of humoristic aspects, I guess, of doing spoken word and doing performances like this, because I know my performances tend to be pretty dark and like pretty serious. So I'd want to move into a space that provides for a little bit more of a lighter touch, I think would be really nice. But the concept of social awkwardness and miscommunication and anxiety and needing other people to be someone doesn't really feel explored yet. Like I'm still in there.
And it's a big pool to explore.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it's
never ending.
So much content.
Yeah.
Both ways, from the dark to the humoristic thing, and everything in between.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, the inspiration right now does feel kind of endless, just because everything feels kind of inspirational, which is a very nice place to be in. So I'm trying to hold on to that for as long as I can.
So what's your process like when you guys get together and you practice? Maybe where are you sourcing inspiration for that? Is it improvised then when you're in a garage or wherever you practice?
So if we get a performance, someone asks us for a performance like March 23rd, I just throw it into the group. I just say there's a performance then, who can join? And I have 2 dancers, 2 visual like VJs, and a group of 6 musicians now. And then anyone who says, yeah, I'll join in, they just join in. So it's always different. So the last performance was with Luc Laporte and Sjoerd de Rooij, which is a bass player and one vocalist, and Wouter Smit, the VJ. And for the March 23rd, it's going to be Hugo. So that's the guitarist. He works a lot with like prepared guitar. So he has this like a toolbox of different weird things that he sticks in between his strings, or he uses like a brush to brush his strings to make different sounds.
Wow.
So, and then there's no other spoken word person. So then it's going to be just me. And the idea is just that everybody kind of knows the materials that we work with, and then we just see from there. So we're now at a point, because the whole process of making Hyperself was pretty intense. So now we're at a point that we don't really need to rehearse anymore, because we just know the materials. And for a performance of like 15 to 20 minutes, improvising that is pretty easy.
Cool.
Or like doable.
Yeah.
So there's not really much of a process right now anymore, actually.
That's nice.
Yeah. It is very comfortable, because it's just very easy to accept performances now, and it keeps it very exciting every time. So yeah.
Do you think the audience looks forward to it being improvised, or how's that different to giving this something that they know has been practiced and sort of honed and defined?
I think that's where the spoken word part becomes very important, because like the texts have been rehearsed, obviously, because they can be long texts. Most of them are shorter texts. And like when we have a few texts, for example, that are dialogues, sort of very abstract inner dialogues that will go like yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, why? Because feelings, just feelings. Yeah, because feelings. Why feelings? I don't know. Well, then no. Yes, no, yes. Like it'll be things like that can be very easily improvised with, but still have a structure to them. So I guess that is something that the audience, I mean, because you do have to give them something that is rehearsed or prepared, to otherwise it becomes too loose. Also for me, otherwise you can't really push a concept in it, and I really wanted there to be a concept. But I did, after the last performance we had last Friday, we were like speaking about ways of getting some musical materials in there that are like the hard thing is, if you're working with different musicians and different spoken word people every time, like how can we shape the musical materials in such a way that if we're playing with bass and drums, we can use the same musical material that we would use if we were playing with like 3 spoken word people and just a guitar.
Right.
So I guess that's kind of the challenge we're in now. But yeah, we're working on that. I guess there is a process then.
Yeah.
We're talking about
it's like controlled freedom, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, structured improvisation.
Exactly. That's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
So are we very curious now to hear what you have for us to improvise?
Very curious.
Yeah, all right.
Let's do this.
Let's do it. Let's see what happens. Lines drawn in the sand by the hand of a child. So carefully the godchild arranges the world before him, his fingers dipped in pastel sugars. Tiny gemstones, mountains, long vanished and eroded into tiny specks. And so he creates, shaping civilizations from sand, man and women from clay, feathers and sticks, found objects on the beach, and into them he dreams. Lives lived, born and suffered, families, destinies, fragility and strength. And so the child God creates and dreams wondrous worlds, attachment, pain and struggles, into his little world, and then by the turn of a tide or a familiar voice calling, or a familiar voice calling, or a familiar voice calling, or a familiar voice calling. So he gets up and in his clumsiness stumbles and shatters the very world he had just created, and so lines drawn in the sand were drawn to remain. Lines drawn in the sand will never remain. Lines drawn in the sand were drawn to remain. Lines drawn in the sand will never remain. Lines drawn in the sand were drawn to remain. Lines drawn in the sand will never remain. Lines drawn in the sand were drawn to remain. Lines. And so our lives pass in the very theater that had just opened like a flower, closes in on itself once more in a strange, mute gesture of undeath, of unlife, of things passing without a trace into an unknown. Ruins and fragments that reminisce nature, disappearing into ruins and nature without form, and so, in silence colored by longing from an unseen source, the next chapter opens and play figures emerge. Glimpses of light in the night of your chambers, you find yourself. Standing across from each other. Standing across from each other. Reaching for each other. Staying stable around each other. Seeming a lot like each other whilst staring at each other. Afraid of each other. Seeing every other person in the other. Seeming a lot like each other whilst staring at each other. Turning away from each other. Walking away from each other. Walking away from each other. Stagnating between each other. Stagnating between each other. And then staying stable around each other. Stagnating between each other. Afraid of each other. involuntarily hating each other,
Craving each other.
craving each other. Anxious, nervous, easily distracted, paranoid, stops frequently, thinks too much, but doesn't think of anything, looks around, searching, comparing, watching. Always afraid of abandonment. Worries about not being included. Worries more about intentionally being excluded. Makes bad jokes and laughs at the wrong moments. Too silent or too loud 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 or too loud. And so in silence, colored by longing from an unseen source, the next chapter opens and play figures emerge. Glimpses of light in the night of your chamber, you find yourself drawn once more into a world, and you find yourself moving softly, like on a wave, towards a calling so convincing, from a direction never seen before, and the sad longing for the world which is past that you clutched in the corner of your world, left there on the floor as you turn, already forgotten as it slips from your hands. Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It was very transcendental. Is that the word?
It's probably a word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Transcendental. Yeah, no, it was very vivid for me, sort of hearing you speak, the internal dialogue going on, you know, the back and forth, and also you sort of singing in between. I thought that was really powerful. So now it's really cool. Can you tell us how, why, where the inspiration came?
I'm always like kind of shaking after performing now too. It's like extremely, I get extremely nervous always, but before playing, just try to sort of, don't show it, don't show it, don't show it. But always after a performance, I'll be like kind of shaking. And I guess that's because one of the things that I've taught myself to do is to not do anything until I feel like, or I should really fucking do something now, because then things need space. A lot of the time, you just need space to develop. And when you're playing, most of the time you're in like a different different experience of time than the audience is, or I've noticed that like you're quicker most of the time because you're like working and you're active and you know what you have to do and you're thinking about the future. So one of the important things I think is to really wait until you feel owner of the space, I guess, that you're in. So always start with silence, and the improvisational part is really nice because I had a couple of texts that I just know, and I had my guitar, but I didn't have anything prepared specifically. Just while setting up the microphones, I did like this one chord a few times. I was like, okay, I think I'll probably use that just so I at least have something. And then I don't know, a lot of things also happen, I guess, by accident. Like in the text that I opened with, I think I stopped twice and repeated one sentence again, which most of the time is just because I sort of tripped in my mouth, like it's just sort of whoops. And then I stop, and then I figure, all right, let's say this pause was a part of it. Well, why would this pause be a part of it? Oh, probably to get emphasis on the previous sentence. Okay, so I'll just repeat that sentence. So something like that. It's always just sort of catching myself when I fall. And if I don't fall, then it's probably because what was there was steady enough already. And then, and the same thing happened. I think I said, and you find yourself. And then I stopped, which is also not in the text. I didn't know I was going to do that, but I think I had to swallow at that point, so I just stopped, and that made a lot of sense. And then I was like, all right, right, if you find yourself. And then I knew I had that text about others on my phone. I recorded it while walking here between the metro stop and your house. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say where inspiration strikes, but it's always just like seeing, okay, where am I now, and which of the materials that I have can either break it or lengthen it, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
I have this sense that there's technique for blind people. It's called geolocation, where
Yeah,
people
like
click
bats.
with like bats, and then I feel like you are somehow performing in that way, like you're checking where your borders are. Where
Right.
your sound bounces off
Yeah,
of the wall, and
it
then
does
that's
feel like that a lot,
right?
Yeah.
I had that visualization somehow.
Actually, it's pretty interesting because at Outspoken,
Yeah.
it was really nervous, and I always need some way of like dealing with that, and that always has to be the start of the performance. Like the opening for me is most of the time like the choice or the thing that deals best with how I'm feeling at that point, which is mostly like nervous, but sometimes it gets into more sort of anxious, or it gets into more excitement or something, and then there's different ways to sort of calm me down. And I was feeling pretty, I guess, awkward or something during Outspoken, and so when I perform with my electronic setup, I have all my different sort of vocal effects and sounds, all sort of live under my buttons and stuff, so I can change the sound that I speak with at any time. And there's this one that glitches up the vocals a lot, like chops it, and then plays everything back at different speeds. So when I say, if I would say that, it would come back as like that. So and that's kind of that. I know it felt really awkward to start with that. So that's what I did. I just literally did in the mic to start, because that was really how I felt, and that always turning that into some musical or like artistic material really works to immediately be sort of in touch with what I'm doing.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful, because then it's kind of organic for each audience,
Yeah.
even when there are mistakes. That to me didn't feel or look like or sound like
Okay,
mistakes
right.
at all,
Okay,
it all
that's
sounded
good,
like
yeah.
it was part of what you were doing. So yeah, that's super
Yeah,
cool.
and that's also where the immersiveness that we spoke about earlier comes back, because it just has to be all in the moment. It's just really important. So also for for the VJ, for example, I wanted to work with him because of how he had those feedback systems working.
Right.
Like there was also somewhere in that weird system, he had an infrared camera that was responding to I guess how close you got to the mic and stuff. So it was this circle of grid lines that was made into a 3D circle that was spinning around its ass, and then when you would put your hand in front of that, the circle would sort of crunch in on itself or grow in weird ways.
Yeah.
And so he was really he was being live with his visuals, and that's the kind of thing that I needed. So that's always been a big part of the process. How can I make this text or this musical material or this discipline? How can I make it so that it's actually has worth to do it live? Whereas I guess the more set in stone your material becomes, the less I need to see it live, I guess.
And do you prepare the audience and sort of say, hey guys, it's going to be completely live, and tell them your process, or do you kind of keep that under wraps and perform as you will? I
try to, I guess. I think it's nice to tell people that it's improvised, because that, I'm not sure. I'm wondering about that. If that works for, I guess, the general audience, if there is a general audience.
Yeah.
But to put them in a mindset of, okay, he's really experiencing it for himself. Too. Yeah. Because I really do, and that's why I get shaky, because I'm it gets pretty fragile, I guess.
Yeah, I think for me it adds an extra element of oh my God, I really need to pay attention, because everything I'm about to experience, I probably won't get to see again in that order, in that way, with those emotions, at present time. So, yeah.
So it did that for you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Knowing you're doing that, it's sort of live. It's okay, sweet.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it feels to be like you're practicing a lot of social, awkward social situations through your art. But how do you deal with all those social awkward situations in real life? What's your advice for people? Because I know a lot of my friends, they get awkward, and then it's all what to do? Do you have any advice since you've been researching it?
Yeah, that's interesting. Do I?
Or tricks, or
Yeah, I guess I've had a conversation pretty recently about something like that. That was in Iceland at some point. Jonathan, one of the organizers of Lunga, hosted philosophical talks about certain things, and at some point we arrived at the idea of systems, and of how, in what way systems respond to the input that you give them, and how you get that input back as output. And there's a simple systems like your shower, that if you put the input of I turn the knob towards hotter water, the output is hotter water, and it's really easy to understand what the system does. And then it starts growing into more and more complex systems, in which you're either not really sure how the input works, with a TV or something. I don't know what my remote control does, but I think I have an idea of what the output will be, so I kind of understand. And then at some point there's systems that are just so complex that you cannot understand, because every time you give it an input, even if it's exactly the same input, and completely different output comes out. So it's completely unpredictable, and I feel that's how life is a lot, and how social situations are a lot. You can do something again because you thought it worked last time,
right?
And then it just doesn't work this time. But the idea of just keep poking it with a different input was nice. So when I guess when I get awkward in social situations, sometimes I'll just pick a random thing to do and just do it, and then see what the output is, because then at least I'm taking a little bit of control over the situation where I'm in. And if you stop giving input to that system, because it's so chaotic, then you really lose every type of control.
So winning by confusion.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I think so. Yeah,
right?
I like that. Because often people will be like, I know, like let's say you just sort of walk up to someone and you just sort of stand next to them and you just give them this weird look or something, but then they might laugh like, what are you doing? And then you're in a social interaction that's real, because he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't really know, but I'm here now. And then you're laughing all of a sudden, and then it makes a lot more sense. So I guess just
try
like
everything random,
and
then
just do
see what
random
happens.
stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
Except that no one knows what the output's going to be anyway. So yeah.
Although I think society is quite well structured
Yes.
for us.
That's true. That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
So like if you extend the hand, person expects you to shake it, right? Like that's the...
Yeah. And but that's also like, I think for me what makes it weird sometimes is like, where do they stop, or when are those rules still authentic or like real? So I'd rather like not do that and do something weird, because then at least what comes out of it is not one of those social rules, but something that's authentic.
It's real.
Yeah.
So that's when I stopped kissing Dutch people 3 times.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Like 3,
Yeah.
And
Oh,
I
right.
stopped because I'm like, it's so awkward. I'm like, I'm just gonna hug, or if I don't know you, I'm just gonna wave and smile
Yeah.
and be normal. Like,
You get that a lot in London as well. Like people kiss. Like, I go for the hug, and then they go
Yeah.
for the kiss. I'm like, oh shit. Are we gonna?
There's a lot of like wet ears in those moments.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
Yeah. Or bumped chins.
Oh god, yeah.
Yeah. Keep doing the hugs. They're nice. Hugging is good.
Hugs are good, yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of controlling, how do you handle the anxiety of being a musician and, managing your
future.
artwork and thinking about the future and what's happening next?
Yeah, I guess it's really hard. I mean, I just graduated, so I don't really have that specific of future prospects right now, which for now is okay. I do think that with the things that we're doing, as either it feels sort of untapped, at least, like this way of every performance being about in the moment and about being real, being improvisational and being so sort of conceptually driven is feels really good, and feels like a new thing for me, at least in the Dutch scene. So we do have something really good to push forward with, and we're getting more and more footage out of like the video of Outspoken, which is on YouTube now, which is nice, so people can get a bit of an idea. And we have a press kit now of Hyper Self as like a complete performance, so people can if there's space somewhere to book a big show like that involves like a total of 16 people or something, like that's possible. And if we want to get booked for smaller shows, that's also possible. And things like Outspoken and Word Up, I think, are really nice. And I do have the feeling that there's a growing platform for spoken word, at least in Amsterdam and Utrecht, which are just the 2 places that I know about. So I have good hopes, but it is just intense, because it's all about like working at it and sending your materials to different places and spending time in something that's just not going to give money at first. So definitely need to find some different ways of being able to, get some funding, either from the government, which I think is what I'm going for now, for big subsidies. And if I get that would be the best, to get the subsidies, because Hyper Self as a performance is there now, and it's just complete and it's ready. So we'll have to see how it goes.
Cool.
And I'll do a master's also.
Nice.
Yes. Yes.
Nice.
Keep studying.
Sweet.
Sure.
All right. Cool, man. Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, and we will be following your journey further on, and maybe we'll have you back when you're big and famous.
Hell yes.
Don't
Next year.
forget us
Next
small,
year.
small
Yeah.
people.
So thank you so much for your time, and
Yeah, cheers, man. So where can our audience find you, for anyone who's looking for you?
Yeah. So right now you can just find us on Facebook. Facebook is either with a D, either ID. And then there's a SoundCloud on which I post experiments, like nothing like entirely produced ready, but I just publish experiments, like time experiments that I've done there. So I've given myself an hour or 2 hours to create an entire track and forcing myself to immediately upload it afterwards. So that's just some weird experimental stuff that gets into all different genres. So you can check that there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Anytime.
And for our audience listening, you know where to find us. It's www.worduppodcast.com, where you can follow us on social media, find out about our current and past guests, and also make guest suggestions. We'll see you guys next time.
Doei!
Doei!
It's a quite boring selection, but you know.
It's okay, you got eggs in there.
Eggs and frogs.
Frogs.
Some healthy things, some natural things.
Protein.
Oh, God.